Hello and welcome to A Week in My Flexible Working Life, brought to you by Condeco, workspace solutions for the future of work. I'm your host, Juliet Mann. Each episode, I'll speak with business leaders and influencers about how their workplace is changing and what the future of work could look like for all of us. My guest today is Heather McGowan, a future of work strategist, thought leader, keynote speaker, author and advisor. Welcome to the podcast, Heather.
Hi there. Thanks very much for having me.
I'm delighted to have you. What you do is help prepare people and businesses for the fourth industrial revolution. So tell me a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So I applied for a job as a future work strategist. No, I'm just kidding. That's what I always say to folks is many of these jobs we're going to have in the future, they're not going to be applications based upon past skills and credentials. It's going to be who can learn in the flow of work and who can, be humble enough to say what they don't know. And I'll say that a lot in this conversation because I think we need to say that more often, but confident enough to make some speculations and connect dots where they see opportunity. And that's basically what I did. I have an undergrad in industrial design from Rhode Island School of Design, so I'm an art student. I went on to work in industry as an industrial designer, as a product designer. I started asking a lot of business questions because if nothing else, the RISD trainee teaches you to ask questions more than to fill answers, which I think we need to do more of in our systems of education. And people said, well, you can't ask those questions unless you're credentialed. So I was like, roger that, got an MBA. And then I found my way into a variety of fields. And I'm going to call on Steve Jobs' comment that you can't connect the dots looking forwards, only backwards. So I worked in everything from socially responsible investing and boutique investment banking, academic strategy and planning, corporate consulting and advising. And along the way, I saw a world that was changing rapidly around us that nobody was doing a really good job explaining, other than the technical determinists who said, basically that the robots were coming and that humans would be useless. And I found that profoundly offensive. So in 2014, I wrote an article on LinkedIn. It was actually a series called Jobs Are Over, the Future is Income Generation, with the idea that you have to think about yourself as a business model, and you have to think about how you create and add value all the time. The second part of that series, 100,000 people read it in 24 hours. I started getting speaking requests from all over the world. The first one was in Australia, and I'm in the US. So I flew over to Australia, and they took a video of that talk. It went on YouTube, it went viral, and fast forward to a couple of years ago now, I just speak all over the world. Now a lot of it's virtual, but I'm starting to do in person again. My business just doubles and triples every year, advising companies on how you help not only the leaders, but the workforce as well, acclimate to the changing conditions that have been around them.
Heather, not everyone's going to be like you with that hunger for learning and that incentive to get onto the next rung of the ladder, because that's a little bit what it sounds like. You wanted to get to the next stage, be able to answer a certain set of questions. So you went about equipping yourself with that next set of skills that were required. How do you hold the hand of businesses to do that on their own?
Sure. Not everybody's like me. And you could say to anybody who's lived with me around me, that's a good thing. I'm always the irritating the person who never stopped asking, but why? But why? Yeah. So how do we help folks? I mean, part of it is understanding, especially at this moment, we're like 607 or 8 days into a global pandemic. It's still a pandemic. People have been through a lot of trauma. Some people have lost loved ones. Some people have been in isolation. We have huge increases in mental illness that we weren't addressing before the pandemic, and they've exploded in the pandemic. So first and foremost is to understand where people are. And we've all been in the same storm, but we're in very different boats. So you may have folks on your team who are single working parents, or single people in isolation, or in conditions where they're just incredibly stressed about health or finances or what have you. So first and foremost is you can't just push people off the ladder and tell them to grab the next rung. You have to provide the safety net. And we haven't done that, whether it's financial, psychological, social. We need to help people feel okay right now. Take mental health days when you need them. Make sure you're okay, because nothing's going to work if you're not okay first. Understanding where people are coming from, first and foremost, having empathy, probably the most important attribute of a leader today, especially right now. And then approach them and say, well, what are you interested in? What is it that you wake up in the morning thinking about? What is the thing you think about before you fall asleep in terms of what you do for your work? How do you want to make an impact? And connecting to that is what I've been calling becoming self-propelled. For some reason or other,
Yeah.
I'm just self-propelled, and I always have been. Not everybody is. But I'm also very privileged, so I don't have to worry about a lot of things that keep other people up at night. So being aware of what conditions people are, what boat they're in this storm, and then help them figure out how to propel that boat.
You remind me of a CEO I spoke to who said, I'm not going to answer the question, what keeps me up at night? I'm going to answer the question in a way that says, what gets me out of bed in the morning? That positivity, that drive. I think in a way, we're looking at things upside down because you're talking about companies coming to you to tap into your expertise who've already recognized that there needs to be this belief in their team, this empathy and understanding of what the workers need. Surely the problem we have in terms of where the future of work is headed is with those companies who don't see the workplace like that.
Yeah. And, to your earlier point, I describe myself as a belligerent optimist in the lemonade business. So I can see the upside of everything. And I think there's a tremendous amount of upside to see right now. What I'm calling what we're entering and what we've been in probably started at the beginning of the pandemic, maybe a little bit before that, is what I'm calling the human capital era, where the greatest investment you can make is in a human, the greatest future delivery for not just society, but investors as well, is unleashing human potential. And there's some really interesting data points that support that. The most profound of which is there was a recalculation of the S&P 500 going back from 1975 up to 2020. In 1975, 84% of the enterprise value of all the companies on the S&P 500 came from tangible capital because we made stuff, property, plant, equipment, physical goods. And humans were the, 16, 17% on the other side. Right around that time, economist Milton Friedman from the University of Chicago wrote an article in the New York Times and said, the only social responsibility for a company is to return profits to shareholders. That's it, full stop. Not employees, not communities, not even customers. And so we proceeded with that shareholder value logic from 1975 to 2019. In that period of time, we treated humans as a cost to contain.
Yeah.
And during that period of time, the value equation absolutely flipped. So fast forward to 2020, 90% now of the value created on the S&P 500, that enterprise value, is intangible. It's patents, it's ideas, it's human capital. So during the period of time, we were treating humans as a cost to contain. Humans were creating nearly all the value, and increasingly from 1975 on. So in 2019, the Business Roundtable, which is the collection of CEOs of the largest American companies, got together and said, the shareholder value era isn't working anymore. It's not actually creating real value for us. We declare an end to it. And they produced some other things. They said it's their stakeholder value error or something like that. It wasn't, to me, it wasn't very clear. And John Hagel from Deloitte did some research going back to 1965 to, I think 2018 was the last time he calculated it. And every year, every time he calculates it, the trend continues. He sees about a 65% decline in return on assets during that period of time. So basically the shareholder value, we extracted value, we didn't create value. We treated humans as a cost to contain. And now increasingly from Edelman's Trust Barometer to this recalculation of the S&P 500, humans are creating all the value. Investors want to know about humans such that the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2020 said human capital has to be listed on your financial disclosure documents. They don't know what it means yet, but it's a signal. All three of those are a signal that humans are the source of the greatest value. If that's the case, how do you treat your most valuable asset? You make sure it's well rested, you make sure it's well educated, you make sure it's well trained, you make sure it has good mental health and wellness. This is a huge shift that we're going to be seeing, I think, over the next decade or so.
So this focus on human capital, you're saying we're already in this era. We're seeing the signs already, possibly the focus on going greener, becoming cleaner, possibly that is inputting on it too. So what you're saying is it's not about where we work. It's not about how we work. It's a whole combination of who, what, why, when, how.
Exactly. Thank you for teeing that up. So that's the way I've been doing my talks lately. I do keynote talks for companies all over the world, huge companies, conferences, every industry sector, from hairdressers to insurance to sanitation workers to the military. There's not a sector I think I haven't spoken to. And they're all trying to figure this out. And everybody started the conversations at least a year or so ago. People kept saying, can you give me a talk on what work's going to look like in the future, where work's going to take place? And I said, we've had this forced social experiment. And in this forced social experiment, we've been using tools and technologies that are a decade or older. So Zoom was 2011. WebEx was 95. All these tools are a decade old. What really changed was behavior because we were forced to. So that's why I say digital transformation is simply human transformation. And so the where of work is going to be really interesting. It's going to change settlement patterns. It's going to change budgets. You're going to increase your IT spending, maybe reduce your real estate spending. It's going to change from central hubs to satellite offices. A lot of changes that will take place over time and maybe give folks better work-life balance, we hope. But the other thing that it brought up, and it became abundantly clear in the first few weeks of the pandemic, is who works? The workplace was designed for a straight white male with a wife at home to handle all the caregiving responsibilities. And whether you look at moms resigning en masse, fewer women in the workforce, DEI initiatives, we don't have a workplace that is designed for our workforce. And we have a lot globally, acutely in the US, particularly in caregiving, but globally to do on the front of that. What we do for work, we train people at university to be individual contributors, largely doing routine and predictable work, treating people to answer questions, not ask them. And increasingly, technology is going to take over those routine and predictable tasks. How we work 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, because Henry Ford discovered in 1914 that all the accidents happened on the production line in the 10th and 11th hour. So he capped work at 8 hours a day, ran 3 shifts, doubled folks' pay, productivity and engagement went up, and we've kept it for 100 plus years. We find that cognitive labor breaks down differently. We've seen studies from Iceland looking at 1% of their population working almost a day, half a day to a day shorter. Microsoft in Japan. There was a trust company in New Zealand. There's a Unilever, I think, is experimenting in Europe. We don't need to work 5 days a week for non-time-bound work. In fact, creative labor breaks down to about 4 hours. So if we want to start unleashing human potential, we need to think not necessarily about more hours, but maybe fewer. Maybe companies will start bragging about how many vacation days or weeks their employees work versus how many hours they log.
I can definitely get on board with that. It's funny because you're saying here, investing in people doesn't need to be expensive. It's just about sitting down and going over the numbers and jiggling them about a bit.
Yes. And one of the biggest things is why we work. Folks want to be connected to a sense of purpose, feel like they're making an impact. If we've been staring at our Zoom screens and our team screens for 608 days or whatever it's been now, as of this recording, we start questioning, is this what I'm doing with my life? Is this really the mark I want to leave on the world? Especially if you see people around you dying. People who worked in unsafe, close contact work during the pandemic were like, you know what, I'm not doing that anymore. And other folks who were dialing into Zoom saying, I'm just not inspired. This is not my self-expression. So we're seeing, I think, the biggest shift around that why piece of it, which I think can be absolutely solved and creates a great opportunity for redesigning work.
Not everyone has that luxury, though, to do the job that they dream of. I'm lucky I have, but I would say the majority of people are doing a job they need to do to pay the bills.
Yep, absolutely. But with the balance of power shifting to the employees, I see that they have a greater sense of their own power. And I see them, resigning en masse. We need to do better protection for employees who are facing unsafe conditions and violence and that sort of thing. So where the great resignation is happening, where people are feeling unsafe, we're going to need to respond. I get it. I won the lottery. I have one of the best jobs in the world. Not everybody's going to be as lucky as I've been, but everybody should feel safe. Everyone should feel some connection to self-expression along the way. And I think we can do that no matter what you do.
What about education? That's a huge part of this, isn't it? Especially as we're trained in a certain way, get your qualifications, then you are equipped to do jobs A, B, and C. Do you think a university course could maintain its value while jobs are evolving and changing so rapidly? Already there's a huge conversation in the United Kingdom, for example, that apprenticeships might be the way forward rather than degrees.
Yeah, I think both. Full disclosure, I spent more than a decade in higher ed trying to change it. And let me tell you, it's like moving a cemetery. It's not easy. What I see happening is, and part of it is the financial pressure, particularly in the US around the cost and value of education, is we've been training folks with predetermined skills and existing knowledge that are outdated before you probably walk across stage or dial into Zoom to collect your diploma. That's got to change. We've also myopically focused on a single degree. Full disclosure, I don't want to have surgery or drive across a bridge that was designed by somebody who watched YouTube videos. I want folks in certain sectors absolutely to continue to be credentialed. But I don't know that that's the majority. I think most of us need to learn how to learn how to ask questions, have many more experiences. I'm fully on board with internships, apprenticeships, co-ops, what have you, that give people a sense of not only what they're good at, but what they're interested in. Because the classroom isn't really a great simulation for the work environment. It's a really crappy one. I can see the universities that are going to survive and thrive being ones that are more like gym memberships. You go for a year, you get, a baseline in learning how to learn, you get exposed to certain things, you have an experience, you go work for a couple of years, you come back, and maybe the degree is not something you sit for 4 years to do and then dine out of what's now a career that's at least a decade longer.
It can't be like a gym membership though, because look, you can sign up, you can pay a year in advance, get your locker key and go once or go twice. Like when the new year comes around. Or, you can be virtuous and, sign up for a course of body pump. But come on, it sometimes takes a little bit more motivation on a rainy, cold autumn day to get off your bottom and go to that class.
Point well taken. I have been a patron, and that's how I refer to myself, of many gyms. So the analogy was just the idea that you could come and go back for retraining. And it may not be the same institution, but learning is going to be continuous. One of my expressions is we used to learn once in order to work, and now we're going to work in order to learn continuously. And it's not always going to be going somewhere to get credentialed. It's much more learning in the flow of work. But the universities, if they do understand how to help people learn and how people get a level of self-discovery and self-awareness, they will have relevance. Because I don't think workplaces are going to have the resources to be half university and half work, which is almost what we're going to need them to be to help folks continue to learn in the flow of work.
This sounds exciting. It sounds empowering. But where could things go wrong? Where have you seen them go wrong? What kind of complications could arise?
A number of things. One, there's the skills gap, which we're upside down on right now. And I've been saying, again, belligerent optimist, that a skills gap is actually a good thing. Because when the skills gap forms, when a human demonstrates a skill and then the market values the skill in excess of supply. So it's actually progress. But where it could go wrong is we start hiring people who don't have the skills we need. We don't have the ability in-house to skill them and then we need to do, and we're lost. That could be a concern. So we do need to figure this out. The kind of world I'm painting a picture of is, an unfinished bridge we're trying to drive across. And I'm aware of that. So I'm trying to get the message out to as many people as possible that we all start laying that bridge across so that we can make it.
And the people that laid it aren't the ones that looked up a YouTube video to see how it was done.
Exactly. Exactly.
Let's talk about the impact of diversity in the workplace. I know you're a champion of this too. To what extent are we at a tipping point here?
Well, we're well past the tipping point in terms of you look at our population. I'm in the U.S. Our first census, I just heard this morning, in 1960, 90% of the people in the U.S. were white. Now we've had the first decline in the white population since we've been tracking it. And everyone's kind of focused on that. What I think is more interesting is 18 and under in the U.S., there is no racial majority. Gen Z, which is the generation that's just entering the workforce right now, is the most educated and the most diverse. So we have diversity here. We're not tapping into it. It's still at the kind of lower levels in an organization. But there's so much data, and the data is not new. It's been around for a while, that when you have diversity in the leadership aspects of your organization, whether it's in the C-suite or the board, you think differently, you make decisions differently, you lead differently, you govern differently, and you've got better financial returns and you're better meeting your market. And it's kind of common sense, because we say people of color, it's really people of the global majority. If we are all, many of us, going to become global companies, if we're not already, then we got to give reality that white people are actually the majority, but that's been the assumed majority, at least in the US and other parts of the world. So changing that structure, and I say it's not an additive process, but a chemical change, is long, long overdue.
You've said you work from companies from pharmaceuticals to hairdressers, all shapes
Mhm.
and sizes. So what's holding them back? If we know this, if the evidence is there, then it could lead to more productivity. Could lead to more meaningful work. It's going to make those shareholders more money. What's holding things up?
Just a side note, I don't know that productivity is our best measure. We're still hanging on to it. I think engagement might be a better measure because we can produce a lot of crap that's productive. But if we've got engaged people feeling like they have a sense of self-expression, they're making an impact on the world, we're going to have better quality. So just that's
Okay.
something I think time and productivity together, I think, are things we need to emphasize less and emphasize engagement, quality, and value more in all forms of value.
I'm
One of the things
stuck
that
in
holding us,
Milton Friedman's zone, aren't I?
well, we're
Yeah.
all conditioned that way. We
Yeah.
can't help it. That's we talk about like, oh, okay, since people have been working at home, are they more productive? It's like, well, okay, yeah, they're attending more meetings, they're working more hours. How are we measuring that? So that's something I've been sort of pushing against. We don't have a grid replacement yet. I think engagement's a good one, but that's something that, again, that's part of a bridge that needs to be built. But why haven't we changed? Nobody wants to give up power. One, two, people are uncomfortable with change, so it's been slow, and it may take some of the directives like NASDAQ. I think it's NASDAQ. You have to have a divorce board. Fortune 500. I've been looking at the Fortune 500 as long as I've been in business. This year was the first year. You look at the description of the company, you look at the financial performance. Right below those key metrics is your DEI measures because they're now realizing that it's not an HR policy, it's an investor concern. So how diverse is your board? How diverse is your middle management? How diverse is your leadership management? And we're just beginning to even understand what diversity is. It's been gender and race, but I think we'll get to neurodiversity and some other factors that make us think and see things differently. It's a painful process because you're asking one segment of the population that has always assumed power to give up some of that power and to think differently. You're also asking to be very intentional about making some of those hires and some of those promotions because you just get better odds of succeeding in a lot of places in the developed world if you were born straight, white, and privileged. You've got to be more intentional if you want to reach out and have more of your company in the inside look like the outside.
And the more intentional companies are, how will it potentially change the global economy?
I think we could see more companies meeting their markets better. I think we could see less of an idea of I'm a US company or I'm a European company. And I think that's one thing that this pandemic has done where talent sits is less of an issue. It's more what time zone do you operate in and what's your primary language. I could see it being much more of a global society and a global economy.
Well, I have to say, you've sold us on the idea, Heather. But where to start? I mean, if you were talking to employers now, how can they start to set these changes in motion?
One of the things to talk about first and foremost is how do you lead? And most organizations are still stuck in that sort of physical capital mindset where your leaders are one, your person who has the most time in the industry, the highest credentials, and they're the unquestioned expert. And that's in some ways really dangerous right now because so much of what we're doing and going to be doing is like this pandemic. We don't know. This is what we know today. This is what we're trying. This is what we're figuring out. So it's much more, to use Simon Wardley's language, he says there are three types of people. There are pioneers, settlers, and town planners. The pioneers go out there and figure out which end is up, figure out which direction we should be going in. They deal with all the ambiguity and uncertainty. And then you have your settlers who take the information from the pioneers and sort of shape it into a business model or product. And then your town planners, which scale and reduce risk. We have so many leaders out there, and they've been trained. I have my MBA. This is how they train folks in their MBA. They train you to be a town planner. They train you to scale and reduce risk. But the world we're in is going to be very much like this pandemic, maybe with not as much stress and trauma, but we're going to need more folks who are pioneers and settlers, people who can deal with ambiguity and vulnerability. They've got to be humble enough to know what they don't know. They're going to be confident enough to make a leap. And they've got to be willing to learn and adapt. There was one biopharmaceutical company that I did some advising for, and this was more than a decade ago. And they had figured out, as a high-tech company, everybody who worked there basically had their doctorate. And when you have that mindset, you've got a bunch of unquestioned experts. And they realized that it was actually hurting their business because the expression, if I have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, every single one of those leaders had a hammer where the nail was their PhD thesis. And so they went through this training to determine whether or not you could be a senior leader in their organization, like a week-long boot camp. And if you relied too much on your expertise, you couldn't get to the next level of leadership because you would be blinded by your own bias.
So it's part of the toolkit, but it's not the be-all and end-all. You need to be a people person. I mean, why are these things you're talking about different to what we already know about leadership credentials?
Because we've been more comfortable having someone who stands up as a leader saying, I have the answers, I know, I'm going to tell you what to do, I'm going to focus on driving productivity. And now we need leaders who say, this is what I know, this is what I don't know. The greatest ways I get this across when I do talks is I say to the audience, especially when it's leadership or senior leadership, how many of you have people on your team who have skills and knowledge you don't have? All the hands go up. Because once you get to a certain level of leadership, chances are good you're not a data analyst, you're not a cybersecurity expert, you're not a machine learning expert. Fill in the blank of all the skills and knowledge that are flowing through organizations now. Your leaders most likely are not an expertise in any one of those things, or maybe even none of those things. And so they have to orchestrate and lead in a very different way.
And they make sure that they've got a team around them who fill in all of those blanks and keep asking questions so that everybody keeps learning more.
Right.
Great. I think I can give your talk now. I'm only kidding. Only kidding. Heather, look, I'm going to challenge you now to come up with just 3 words that you think best sum up the future of work.
Time, trust, capacity. Time is your only non-renewable resource. You got to mindfully manage it. Trust is your most valuable asset. Every interaction, you're either building or burning it. And capacity is your most important investment because you've got to invest in your capacity, and it's not your ability to do more. It's your ability to meet the moment. So that's your wellness capacity, your learning capacity, your mental capacity, your intellectual capacity.
So the future of work is meeting the moment.
Yep.
Well, Heather, thank you so much. Where can our listeners find out more about you, about what you do, about your talks?
Well, I'm very active on LinkedIn. If you like to learn like I do, I post the 3 or 4 articles that impress me the most that morning every day. So you can find me on LinkedIn there. You can follow me. For information about what I'm writing about, reading about, where I'm speaking, getting me to speak, heathermcgowan.com. It's MCGOWAN.com. And thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
You've been listening to A Week in My Flexible Working Life, brought to you by Condeco Workspace Solutions for the Future at Work. If you've enjoyed listening to this discussion, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Don't forget to spread the word and tell a friend about the podcast. They'll thank you for it later. I'm Juliet Mann. Goodbye.